Hi friends, welcome to my video. Today I'm going to be going over all the important tips and information that you need to know when you're planning your trip to Guatemala. I wanted to make this video because I know that while there are already blog posts and guides out there about traveling to Guatemala, there still isn't as much info on it as, say, its bordering country, Mexico. I also think that the less you hear about a destination, sometimes the more daunting it may seem to plan all of the logistics for it, but I'm here to tell you that it wasn't difficult at all, and I'm going to break it down for all of you in this video. I will be primarily speaking about Lake Atitlán and Antigua because those are the two places that I visited within Guatemala, but hopefully these tips still help you out even if you're traveling to other places. Let's start with some basics, shall we? So the most common language spoken in Guatemala is Spanish. However, because there are still many Mayan communities living there and there's a very strong influence of Mayan culture there, there are also a lot of Mayan languages, one of which I was exposed to the most was Kakchikel. It would be really cool if you learned some of that. I was able to learn a couple of words when I was there, but Spanish is the most spoken language. The exchange rate at this very moment that I'm filming this video is 1 USD to 7.81 Guatemalan quetzales. So when you're looking at prices in Guatemala, you can kind of just divide it by 7 or 8 in your head, and then that's how much it'll cost in USD. There are wet and dry seasons in Guatemala, which may influence the time of the year that you go. So the dry season is from November to April, and then the wet season is from May to October. I went during January of this year and the weather was amazing, sunny for the most part, and in the mid 70s to the high 70s during the day. So highly recommend January through April if you want to go. Now I want to talk about transportation in between cities because I feel like this was the biggest concern that I had when I was planning Guatemala. There are multiple transportation options, but let me just simplify it for you guys and tell you that there really are just two ways to do it. I would say these are the most convenient and worry-free options. So the first one is to book a shared shuttle, which means that you'll be riding with other passengers going to the same destination as you. You can Google shared shuttle in Guatemala, and I would book through trusted travel websites like Viator, TripAdvisor. I'll leave some links below. The other option is to go with a private driver or taxi or private shuttle, Uber. So basically a service that's just dedicated for you. When we landed in the Guatemala City airport, we went straight to Lake Atitlán, and we actually booked a private transfer by asking our Lake Atitlán Airbnb host to arrange it for us. It was pretty expensive. It was 140 USD for the transfer. However, it was a 4-hour long drive from the airport to the lake. And because we took a red-eye flight, we knew we were gonna be pretty tired and we just didn't really want to bother with being crammed in a shared shuttle. So we decided to just splurge and do the private transfer. However, later when we moved from Lake Atitlán to Antigua, we did book a share shuttle. And from the lake to Antigua, it's about a 3-hour drive, and that only cost 20 USD per person. And I will say the shared shuttle really wasn't that bad for the amount of money you can save just booking a shared shuttle. You are definitely going to be sitting right next to other passengers as well, but everyone was really respectful. I would say the drivers were pretty on time, maybe late about 5 to 15 minutes, but overall, I would recommend the shared shuttle service. And again, I'll put the links down below as to which ones we did. If you are looking to travel via a private transfer, the number one thing I'd recommend doing is just asking your hotel or your hostel or your Airbnb host to hook you up with that transfer, because a lot of times they know the travel agencies around Guatemala. They all have a network of travel agencies that they use, and it's a lot more reliable to go through them versus booking it online yourself. And pretty much every time they're happy to help, and they've been nothing but hospitable. So that's what I would recommend. Next, I'm gonna go into the bulk of all of the important tips and information that I have for you guys, breaking it down by destination. And the first one is Lake Atitlán, where to stay, what towns are there, how do we pick which towns that we stay at. So there is the main town of Panajachel, which is where I stayed. Given that I was only in Lake Atitlán for 2.5 days, convenience was really important for me, and I completely do not regret my decision. I loved staying in Panajachel because that's where the main boat dock is, and that's where the majority of restaurants, coffee shops, supermarkets are. It's actually so easy to get around to all of the other towns just by boat. So I was still able to do a fair amount of exploring. Panajachel was essentially kind of like my home base. Other popular towns that people stay at are Santa Cruz, San Juan, San Pedro, and San Marcos. Every little town has its own charm, and I know sometimes if you're going to Lake Atitlán for, say, a yoga retreat or something that's through an organized group, there are specific accommodations that you do have to stay at. But if you feel like you're stuck on not knowing which town to stay at, I would just start by looking at accommodations. If there are any that stand out to you, then I would just go with that one. It is honestly so easy to move around, you guys. I'm usually someone who doesn't like to be in like the main touristy center of whatever location I'm visiting, and that's kind of the vibe that Panajachel was giving me when I was doing my research. But I loved staying there, and I wasn't even really in the town for the majority of the time. I was out exploring. So don't feel like if you choose a town that you're going to be stuck there, because it's very easy to move around unless you have your eyes set on a specific accommodation. Speaking of accommodations, I stayed in an Airbnb that was a little bit away from the major streets in Panajachel, and I freaking loved my Airbnb. I'm gonna link it down below. My Airbnb was kind of like a villa. It had its own private deck. It had a hot tub with just gorgeous views of the lake. And these views are pretty much why I decided to choose this Airbnb. It was pretty isolated and it was perched on top of a hill, which made going down and up to and from our Airbnb a little bit tough and a bit of a workout every day. But there were barely any places around us. There were maybe a couple more private villas and then one bed and breakfast right across from us. So it felt very peaceful. The service that came with our Airbnb was also amazing. We pretty much had our own like private helper, and every time I needed to call a tuk-tuk to get into town, all I had to do was send her a message on WhatsApp and she would organize one for me within 10 to 15 minutes. To have her help was actually necessary, and I appreciated it so much. Other accommodation options are hostels, which average to around $20 to $40 per night, and a lot of hostels there have really beautiful views. I think hostels are a really good option because something that I noticed about Lake Atitlán is that when it comes to the evening, there isn't like a whole lot of stuff to do. So when you're within the town, it does feel a little bit isolating at times, or peaceful depending on what your intention is when you go there. So if you're someone that likes to mingle with people, that likes to meet new people and keep it lively at night, then I think a hostel's a really good option. There are also a lot of options for hotels, and the cost really just depends on how simple or luxurious your hotel is. There's really a big range when it comes to Lake Atitlán accommodations. Whatever you like, there is something out there for you. In terms of getting around by land, we used tuk-tuks the most. Each ride, which lasted about 10 to 18 minutes, would cost about 40 to 50 quetzales. Also, if you're worried about luggage, the tuk-tuks do have space behind the seat for luggage. Just make sure it's not oversized, but it was good for our 2 backpacks and our carry-on luggage. And the main way to get between each town around the lake is by boat. There are off-roads and back roads, but we asked several people about them, and there aren't really a lot of people taking them because they're dangerous and you need a car. So you want to take the boat every time you go in between the towns. So when you walk towards the dock, there are going to be people asking you if you want to take a public or a private boat. The most common and affordable way is going to be the public boat, and that usually costs about 25 quetzales for a standard trip. If it's going to be a shorter destination, so say like a neighboring town and the ride is like 5 minutes, it could be 10 quetzales. But for the most part, if you're hopping to a town that's a little bit further, it's going to be 25. Private boats are a lot more expensive, usually 10 times the price. So you could splurge on that if you want to, but public boats were totally fine. Just know that both locals and tourists take these boats. So if you hear that locals are paying a more affordable price, that's because they live there, so don't think that you're getting ripped off. And for the most part, I felt very safe taking these boats, and I never once had to negotiate the price, or I was never given the wrong price. So just always remember to say that you want to take the public boat. I actually really enjoyed taking the boats because the views were so pretty, and I felt like being on the boat was kind of like an activity in itself. And if you're curious how long it takes to get from one town to another, I would say from Panajachel to the town completely the opposite direction, so the furthest town away from that, take about 45 minutes because they do stop at each town. So that kind of gives you an idea of how long it can take. When it comes to restaurants and activities, I would say the most restaurants are, again, in the main town of Panajachel, but there are also restaurants and cafes in other towns, just not as many. I will have to say that there really weren't many options for authentic Guatemalan food. I think because tourism is such a big thing there, I found myself eating Western food, pizza, and to be honest, I think if you want really good food, you should stay at a homestay and have a Mayan family cook for you. That would be probably the best option. But at least there were a lot of cafes and restaurants with beautiful views of the lake, and you can just sit there forever and sip on coffee. And activities, there are a lot you can do, one of which I saw the most is paragliding. So if you're not afraid of heights, you can glide in the sky and take in all of the views. You can also do kayaking, paddleboarding, hiking. You can experience a traditional temazcal, which is a Mayan sauna, which is something very, very spiritual to Mayan communities there. You can do workshops and learn traditional Mayan weaving. You can also do yoga and meditation classes. What I love about Lake Atitlan is that you can experience as peaceful as an itinerary as you want, or you can be as active as you want. There are so many activities that you can do, or you can just completely be a potato at your hotel and just soak in the views of the lake. One question that I had in my mind before I went to Lake Atitlan was, is the water safe to swim in? And I would say for the majority of the lake, no, because there is a lot of runoff and stuff growing in the lake from nearby towns. I don't think it'd be too safe to swim in. You could try if you want to, but I don't recommend it. However, there was a specific spot, the nature reserve in the town of San Marcos, where the water was super clear and beautiful, and a lot of people were actually diving into it. You can do kayaking there, and I saw some people swimming. So I do recommend that spot for swimming, but the rest of the lake, I don't think I would. Lastly, I do want to mention briefly about safety in Lake Atitlan and in Antigua, which I'm gonna be going into next. I felt super, super safe during my entire 9-day trip in Guatemala. I was kind of shocked at how safe I felt, because usually when people plan to travel to Central America, I think safety is understandably one of their biggest concerns. Maybe because of what you hear in media, maybe because of the language barrier, maybe because it's a very different culture than what a lot of people are used to and wherever they live. But no, it was super, super safe. And while I do still suggest not walking around alone late at night and still having your belongings close to you, I will say that it's one of the safest countries I've experienced in Central America. And everyone was so welcoming, so friendly, so helpful. Even with people trying to sell us souvenirs, as soon as we said no thank you, they were just like, okay. And we were like, okay, I guess that's it. So yes, all in all, I felt very, very safe in Guatemala. The second and last destination that we went to in Guatemala was Antigua. Antigua is Guatemala's former capital city. It was founded in the 16th century, and it was colonized by Spain, thus the beautiful Spanish colonial buildings that you see now. But a huge part of Antigua was destroyed by earthquakes in the 1700s, so a lot of ruins still exist today from that natural disaster, and there were a lot of things that had to be rebuilt and restored. But now it is a charming, beautiful, loved UNESCO heritage site that a lot of people from around the world come to see, including me. Antigua is about a 45-minute drive from Guatemala City Airport, and I highly recommend just taking an Uber. It costs about $25 to $35 depending on whether there's surge pricing. You can take public buses. There are always other options, but just to make it simple for you guys, because I assume if you're watching this video, you probably are looking for simple information, I would just do the Uber. So next would be, where should you stay in Antigua? What kind of accommodation should you book? What I loved about Antigua is that it is super walkable. So where do you stay? It doesn't really matter. If you just stay in the town of Antigua, I promise you can walk everywhere. It's usually I think the most we walked was about 20 minutes, and that's because we went to a farm. But for the most part, everything was within, I would say, a 10-minute walking distance, which made everything so easy. There are tuk-tuks available if accessibility is a concern, or if you just don't want to walk. But I did just want to point out that Antigua was super walkable. In terms of activities to do when you're in Antigua, I would say when you're in the town of Antigua, it's very slow paced and very relaxing. I highly recommend just taking strolls throughout the town, maybe taking a free walking tour like I did. But honestly, the beauty of the town just comes with it existing. One of the more popular activities that people usually do would be volcano hikes. The one that I did was the Pacaya volcano hike, and it's advertised as a family-friendly hike, which I do feel like is pretty accurate. There's also the more difficult hike known as the Acatenango volcano hike. That one I actually plan to do because you get to camp at the base of the volcano and it's an overnight thing. However, that wouldn't have worked with the timing, and I did hear that it was pretty difficult, so maybe another time. To book these volcano tours, you can just search it up online. I'll link the one that I took down below. I do really recommend this tour agency, but there are a lot of options online because it's a really popular thing that people do. A lot of people come to Antigua just to hike these volcanoes, and Antigua is kind of like their home base. I won't go too much into these hikes, but if you have any questions about the volcano hikes, or especially the one that I did, let me know in the comments below. When it comes to restaurants, there are options for both authentic Guatemalan meals but also international meals. You can see what I ate if you watch my Antigua vlog. I do also link all of the restaurants that I went to in that vlog. But there are so many options. You will never go hungry, I promise. I also recommend going to a rooftop terrace, either for a light meal or drinks, because then you can see the volcanoes in the back and you can watch the sunset. It's beautiful. And the coffee shops. Even if you're not a coffee drinker, I want you to know Guatemala is known for coffee. So every day I had to go to at least 1 to 2 coffee shops because there were so many options. I even went to this one Japanese coffee shop, but that was opened by a Japanese man living there in Antigua, which I thought was really cool. But definitely make sure to explore the cafes, especially if you're a coffee lover, because Guatemalan coffee is amazing. In terms of prices in Antigua, and I guess in Lake Atitlan too, they weren't really as cheap as I thought they were gonna be. I would say a meal at a sit-down restaurant with service would cost me about $8 to $10 US. I mean, of course it depends on what food you eat, but that was about how much a meal costs. And when it comes to coffee, I would say like a cappuccino would cost between $3 to $4 USD, which again isn't as cheap as I would think things would be in Central America, but maybe because Antigua is such a popular destination for tourism, the prices are the way they are so that their economy can keep thriving. And in Antigua, I would say that you could pay a lot of things in card, but you definitely need cash on hand because not everywhere accepted credit card. And then in Lake Atitlan, you definitely need cash. I would say like 80% of the time. Lastly, to wrap up the video, just some random things that I wanted to share with you guys that I think would be helpful. First thing is tap water is not safe to drink, so I would make sure that you have bottled water. Second thing is we noticed a lot of times that tip was already added to our bill, especially when we were in Antigua. A 10% service charge, which was pretty much automatically added to every bill, so you don't need to really tip outside of that. However, if there isn't service charge automatically added, I recommend about a 10 to 15% tip. Third is the language. My partner Andrew and I both speak a tiny bit of Spanish. My partner Andrew knows a little more than me and can speak more because he did take Spanish in school before. Everywhere we went in Guatemala, we spoke Spanish first, and then if we felt like we really weren't able to continue our communication, then we would ask them if they spoke English. I would say you can get by knowing just a tiny bit of Spanish because there were a handful of people that spoke English, thankfully, but definitely know some Spanish before you go to Guatemala, even just the basic phrases. And lastly, I wanted to give you guys some packing tips because there were definitely a few things that I would have not been able to not bring, and I want to make sure that you guys pack it as well. The first one is going to be Dramamine, which is motion sickness pills. Because Andrew and I took shuttles in between destinations there, the roads were windy, and if it weren't for the motion sickness pills, I don't think I would have been able to make it. They weren't like crazy bumpy or windy, but if you're going to be, for example, in a shared shuttle and you're going to be sitting in the back, you definitely want to have the motion sickness pills. When I was taking boats in the lake, I didn't feel it. However, the boat rides were sometimes choppy, so maybe you need it for that. But yes, because most regions in Guatemala are quite mountainous, I highly recommend having these tablets on hand. The other thing that I would recommend bringing is a pair of really good sneakers or really good walking shoes, because in Lake Atitlán the roads are usually dirt roads, so I guess they also have to be shoes that you're not afraid of getting dirty. And then in Antigua, all of the streets are pretty much cobblestone streets, so make sure that you have comfortable and sturdy shoes so that you don't sprain your ankle, because that almost happened to me a couple of times. And then I highly recommend bringing a down jacket because the temperatures vary quite greatly from daytime to nighttime, especially in Lake Atitlán. It was pretty hot during the day. I actually got sunburnt on my shoulders, so that's another thing you should bring is sunscreen, especially if you're going during the dry season. But during the daytime, it was like in the high 70s and the sun is very, very strong. But as soon as the sun started setting, the temperatures would drop quite drastically. And especially if you're taking a boat ride back, these boat rides can be going quite fast, so you're gonna have a lot of wind blowing on you and you're definitely gonna want a jacket. Okay, the very last tip that I just thought of that I should have added earlier when talking about the boats in Lake Atitlán is that just remember that when you're taking the public boats, the boats run from 6:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. and I believe the last one at 7:30 is going to Panajachel, so there could be boat service ending even sooner than that. After public boat service is done, all you can rely on are private boats, and remember I did mention that those are a lot more expensive than public boats. So just make sure that you plan out your day accordingly and that you can get back to whatever town your accommodation is in before the last boat service. That's it for this video. If you guys want to see the actual vlogs of what I did, what I ate, how I felt, all of that stuff and everything that I did in the actual destinations, and make sure that you check out my vlogs. This video is more about the logistics on how to plan and what to plan, and I hope that these were helpful for you guys. If you're going to Guatemala soon or plan to, I'm so excited for you because Guatemala was such a beautiful country to visit. I would love to go back there again in the future. If you have any additional questions or comments, leave them down below and I'll get back to you. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you all in my next one. Bye!